Hi, this is Dalia for Novara Media, and I'm really lucky to be here with Julia Salazar, who has won a hotly contested primary to be the state Senate candidate for New York's 18th district.
Yes.
Yeah. So for our UK audience, could you tell us a little bit about the kind of wider context of your run and also the platform that you ran on?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a member of the Democratic Socialists of America and ran openly as a Democratic Socialist, which is sort of a big deal, sort of sensationalized in the US, even in New York, where it's very progressive generally. I ran against a 16-year incumbent. His name was Senator Delan, and he'd been our state senator for 8 terms and took more money than any sitting senator from the real estate lobby, was really backed by corporate interests and by the Democratic machine in Brooklyn. I ran a truly grassroots campaign. We didn't take any corporate money, didn't take any real estate money, mobilized thousands of volunteers, knocked on hundreds of thousands of people's doors to bring as many people into the campaign as possible. And ultimately, we increased voter turnout, totally unprecedented in an historic way, and won the Democratic nomination, which in my district is effectively, it's the most important election. So I'm running unopposed in the general election, and in January I'll be the first socialist state senator that New York has seen in a long time.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting about your case and the case of other people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and all that is that it's kind of been the season of broken rules, and that everything we were told about what you need to do to win elections or what makes someone electable has kind of it's all up for grabs now. So what did your run and your victory tell you about what it means to be electable in 2018 now?
For me, it meant bringing as many people into the electoral process as possible. People who are directly impacted by the issues and the crises that we're facing in New York. People who, most people in my district are struggling to be able to afford health care, just to be able to see the doctor. There's an affordable housing crisis. It meant building upon the organizing that people have been doing for decades to advocate for pro-tenant rent laws, harnessing all of that into an electoral campaign so that we could finally elect someone who would be an advocate in Albany, in our state capital, for working people. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So you kind of connected like the infrastructure of community organizing that was already there with what was like sort of electoral politics. What are like the specific ways in which you did that? Because I feel like a lot of the time we hear, oh, we need to get back to communities, we need to whatever. Mm-hmm. But what does that look like kind of on a specific like infrastructural level, that kind of connection?
Yeah, to begin with, in developing my policy platform, I made sure that each plank of the platform, whether it be housing or immigration policy, that it was drafted in concert with directly impacted communities and people who had already been advocating around these issues for a long time. So bringing community organizations into that process and actually creating a platform together, running on that platform, making sure that our canvassers, volunteers for the campaign, that we were drawing from community groups as well. It meant rejecting the politics as usual of instead, seeking input from, I guess, Democratic clubs, less so from institutions, from private interests, and instead going directly to everyday people and asking, what are the issues that are affecting your life, and how do you want to see them change, and how can we do that together? Yeah.
Did you find it was kind of, because I think particularly kind of the model of democratic socialist politics in the US and kind of the model of like Corbynite politics here very much relies on getting out people who have been written off by the establishment as, they don't vote or they don't, and therefore they just don't matter. So a lot of the time, these communities are rightly really deeply cynical of electoral politics. You know, they have like years and years of evidence to not believe that it's actually possible to be fully represented in these kinds of institutions. Did you find it a challenge to build that kind of trust, and how did you do that and build that hope again in these kinds of communities?
Yeah, absolutely. People have been rightly disillusioned with the electoral process. I also was as well, and was really brought back into the process through the Bernie Sanders campaign and through campaigns for Democratic Socialist candidates in local races in New York. I think that making sure that people understand that we are committed to making sure that they are actually shaping the campaign. It helps build trust. People will know that as a future legislator that you are accountable to them, and that you'll take, I will take the model of engaging as many people, just everyday people, working people, in the process of winning this campaign, that will take that model and transfer it to how I will conduct myself as a legislator. And that, I think that making that connection clear to people is really important for building trust and ultimately, as we saw, getting an unprecedented number of people out to vote.
Yeah, and I think, and sort of in that division between kind of like the establishment politics as usual and sort of what you are representing. So we are seeing a struggle now in the Labour Party and also in the Democrat Party in the US between, this insurgent left and the kind of establishment. Eventually someone's going to have to win. So how do we win that struggle in the parties?
I think that our long-term goal, at least mine and DSA's, is our primary goal isn't to transform the Democratic Party, but it's an important secondary goal, I guess. What we really want to see is more insurgent candidates running. I think that when people see victories like that of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, like my own victory, they're seeing that it's possible that you can run a viable and strong campaign and actually build our movement through electoral work. And by sticking to this model and rejecting corporate money, running a truly people-fueled grassroots campaign, I think that when we see more of these victories at the local level, state and federal level, I really hope that it'll be part of a cycle of organizing and of developing more people to run, and soon we'll see a shift in the landscape of the party, the political landscape in general.
Again, sort of going back to the question of electability, something that I was really excited by in terms of your platform, and is really relevant to this conference, is the fact that you ran on a platform of decriminalizing sex work. So a campaign, Labour for Decrim, is being launched at TWT this year, which is campaigning to get the Labour Party to adopt a policy of full decrim. What we've found is that a lot of elected officials support it in private, but feel like it's an electoral liability to sort of say publicly that they're for decriminalisation. What do you say to those officials, and that, as someone who has won an election with this kind of transparently supporting this policy, what do you say to those elected officials, and how did you win? Did you find it challenging to win that platform, or, is that kind of a bit of a myth that it's an unelectable policy position?
Yeah, I think that it's a powerful myth, but it is a myth nonetheless. I ran unapologetically, as on many issues, but when it came to sex work, saying that sex workers are workers and we need to demand the same rights that we demand of the rest of workers, and we also need to be listening to people who are in the sex industry. In my district specifically, it's really disproportionately impacted by the criminalization of sex work in North Brooklyn. And so for me, it was particularly important that I listen to sex worker advocates and make it part of my platform. And ultimately, we won with 59% of the vote. So I think that it is a myth. When we talked to voters about sex work, they weren't fazed. In the same way that democratic socialism used to be sort of scandalous, I guess. It's no longer that way. People don't blink even when you describe yourself as a democratic socialist and say, we want to fight to decriminalize sex work because it's hurting our communities. So I think that I would say to any progressive politician, if and they should believe in fighting for sex workers' rights and to fully decriminalize, to not be afraid to take this stance, because it's, even if it is sensationalized, it's popular among the electorate, and I think that voters will recognize the courage that it takes to stand up for sex workers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and kind of one thing that we've been seeing on both sides of the Atlantic is this idea that socialism is laddie. You've got the Bernie Bros, you've got this kind of Corbyn laddism that is sort of becoming a bit of a thing across the media. Is that a myth, do you think? Or is there something in there?
Yeah, I think it's a myth, and it sort of erases the really large number of democratic socialists, at least in my experience in the U.S. As a Latina, and as somebody who was participating in electing another democratic socialist who's a Puerto Rican woman, right? It's not actually dominated, at least any more than the rest of the political landscape, by men, and it's important that we encourage more women within our ranks to run, and just to step up and lead in any other ways as well, so that we can continue to dispel that myth that it's dominated by men.
Yeah, and finally, kind of as a kind of young Latina woman, how did you get into sort of left-wing politics? And if someone had told you 2 years ago that you would be running for state senate, would you have ever conceived when you first got into left-wing politics that you'd be actually getting into electoral politics eventually?
Yeah, no. If you had told me even a year ago that I was going to run for office, I would have laughed. Yeah. I was a legislative advocate, fighting specifically for police accountability, criminal legal reform, and at the city and state level. So that was my engagement with the legislative process, but it was usually as an agitator that I was going to elected officials and with a whole group of advocates to just demand that they do the right thing. And after a certain number of times of doing this, you realize we need to replace these people with someone who is actually has their ear to the ground. But I didn't independently arrive at that. It was early this year, fellow members of the Democratic Socialists of America approached me and encouraged me to run. And I hear this when I talk to other women who have run for office, that this is often their experience as well, that they really had to be pushed to run, and that was the case for me too. It took a couple months of constantly deliberating about it until finally I saw that we really needed somebody to step up and challenge Senator Dilan, and I'm really glad that I did, even though I am not your conventional politician. Yeah.
Yeah. And has it been a rough ride, or have you kind of found it empowering?
Both. Yeah. It's been extremely challenging to run as a first-time candidate in general, to run in what became really, I think, the most publicized state senate race in history. It was tough it continues to be difficult for me to be in the spotlight, but it also is really empowering for me personally, but more importantly for our movement, that it's shed light on the really transformative work that we're doing, and I think that it is bringing more attention to democratic socialism and normalizing it for people.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Julia. It was really good to chat to you, and it's really great to see kind of actual tangible wins that we can look to and ignore kind of what people have told us about what we need to do to win, and actually see that being bolder than you think you can be is a winning strategy now. So thank you so much for your work, and thanks for coming to chat to us today.
Thank you so much.